Devanj, if you want to give a brief intro of yourself and maybe start with Christian and Jesse, and then I'll allow the other folks to enter when they get into the waiting room, and we can go from there.
Sounds perfect. Well, thanks everyone. Hopefully you had a great break and networking session. Welcome to the AMA on ecosystem builders in the blue economy. We have a great panel here that represents the startup side, the government side, as well as some folks from ecosystem building organizations. With that, thanks to all the panelists who are already here. Jesse, Christian, appreciate you guys being with us. I'll start off with a quick introduction of myself and then pass it over to each of you folks to introduce yourselves. So quick background on myself. My name is Devanj Amin. I'm a senior program analyst at BMNT. We work primarily with organizations in the DoD and intelligence community to accelerate problem discovery, solution exploration, and solution adoption. I specifically work on BMNT's naval portfolio, where we work with stakeholders across the naval research and development enterprise, as well as operational commands to engage industry to solve government problems, which is my limited exposure to the blue economy. I also recently started working with H4X Labs, where, as you'll probably know by now, we focus on accelerating dual-use companies. And with that, I want to turn it over to Christian. A couple minutes to introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. I apologize. I'm a stand-in for our Managing Director, Hope Hopkins, who leads our Blue Tech program for MassChallenge. But I'm excited to be here. My name is Christian Melton. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships for MassChallenge. We are a global accelerator program that has 8 programs around the world: Boston, Houston, Rhode Island, Austin, Jerusalem, Israel, Lausanne, Switzerland, and Mexico City, Mexico. We've helped accelerate over 3,000 startups over the past 10 years that have gone on to raise over $5 billion in venture funding and have gone on to create over 150,000 jobs. One of the big differentiators about our programs is we do not take any equity, and we are very ecosystem based. You'll probably hear me say that more than a few times today. But at the end of the day, MassChallenge is a convening platform for all the resources that are necessary for an early stage company to get off the ground, start scaling, and really building towards impact and building the solutions that are they're going after for the problem sets. So I personally have been leading our dual use ventures program and working closely with our Air Force, really supporting dual use startups get their foot in the door with SBIRs, STTRs, and then the other government contracts they can get. So excited to be here and happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Christian. Over to you, Jesse.
Yeah, thanks everybody, and thanks for having us here. So my name's Jesse Gipe. I'm the PAC South Regional Director for the National Security Innovation Network, which is a DoD organization within the Office of Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. And we were created relatively recently, back in 2016, with the mission of developing a new network of innovators that can help solve national security problems, focused on what we consider to be non-traditional problem solvers, meaning people who aren't already working with the Department of Defense, but come from academia from across the country, as well as early stage startups who have talent and capabilities that matter to national security problems. But for whatever reason, maybe it's because we're hard to work with or we're not very good at communicating our problems always, haven't necessarily found a way to come and engage with the Department of Defense on the wide variety of challenges that our organizations face on a day-to-day basis. And so our organization has a distributed team all across the country. Some of us, like myself, are regional directors who have a multi-state jurisdiction that we cover, where we manage the academic relationships as well as the key defense partnerships across those multi-state regions. We also have individuals embedded within specific universities that we have key academic relationships with. And we also have our programmatic team based back in DC to help execute our programs. So it's really important to us to be kind of right at the heart and center of emerging technologies and trying to figure out how we can leverage great minds out there to tackle meaningful national security problems. And certainly blue tech is a key area for us in a lot of ways. And so excited to think about how the growth of this industry will continue to provide opportunities for new entrants into the national security ecosystem who have ideas about how to solve meaningful global problems.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jesse. Over to you, James.
Hey, thank you so much. Yeah, James Parker. One of the co-founders of Candelytics. We're a graduate essentially of the Defense Innovation Accelerator, which is a partner with NSIN. Essentially that program partners entrepreneurs with DoD lab technology for the purposes of finding additional commercialization opportunities, as well as additional use cases within the Defense Department. So we have founded a 3D analytics company with a partner with the Navy's preeminent LiDAR scanning lab to start out by addressing a maritime use case in law enforcement. So we are working with the Coast Guard to reimagine the drug interdiction process. So right now the Coast Guard finds contraband on board suspected smuggling ships by manually measuring the interior compartments to find kind of discrepancies like false walls, bulkheads, drop ceilings, raised floors. It's very a tedious process. We are using handheld LiDAR scanning technology to be able to give them a 3D view of those ships to enable them to have, again, a kind of incredible three-dimensional spatial awareness to be able to kind of cross-section those vessels and find that. And we are exporting some of those analytics to the commercial maritime industry and have really benefited, again, from working with folks kind of in the blue tech space to identify some of those areas of innovation. Again, just a bit on myself. I actually founded Candelytics as a student, so I'm a joint degree student between Harvard Business School and the School of Engineering, as well as my other co-founders. Both are in school, so we have certainly benefited from great mentors, including Scott, who have helped us navigate this journey of innovating in the maritime space. So thanks for having us today.
Awesome, thank you so much, James. Over to you, Scott.
Yeah, thanks. It's an honor to be here today. I'm Scott Tait. I had the privilege of serving 27 years in the Navy as a surface warfare officer, then transitioned out a little over a year and a half ago, and went to University of California at San Diego, where they were interested in establishing a national security innovation project. So we took a look at it, and over the last 18 months, we've built a network of about 6,500 participants now across the country and across the world through our Five Eyes partners. And what we do is work with broad national security user base, so not just DoD, but also Homeland Security, Coast Guard, CDC, pretty much the entire group. We found a lot of overlapping need. And we bring technology solutions that range from high-end, high-tech readiness level research in the universities all the way through some of the small, medium, and larger size companies, and then help them find a path to get it through the bureaucracy, once it's user validated, through the bureaucracy and into some kind of sustainable funding solution, and try to do a little bit of good in helping improve policy along the way so that this gets easier the second time we try to do it. So pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Scott. I wanted to kick it off with James. From what I know about Candelytics, you've been able to successfully navigate, an ecosystem that's full of key stakeholders such as AFWorks, Naval Information Warfare Center Pacific, the U.S. Coast Guard. And I wanted to know from your perspective, how are you able to navigate and establish key partnerships in this ecosystem with the right stakeholders to not only improve your product, but also to establish those relationships that help you, find your customers as well?
Yeah, well, I definitely want to give a shout out to NSIN and the DIA networks in terms of how beneficial that program was, that accelerator was in opening up networks and connecting us to folks like Scott as well, who have helped us think through and connect with stakeholders and operators, decision makers, policymakers, who have helped us shape kind of our technology and understand, again, the ecosystem and process for adopting this technology. It was one thing to connect with operators who could tell us what their pain points were and what they struggled with, but it was another thing too to be able to connect with higher ups and leadership to understand how that adoption process works. And so leveraging those networks and also being able to have, my co-founders both coming from former Army intelligence was certainly another source of networking that we used to connect with those spaces. But again, Blue tech innovation hubs as well have been key in helping us connect with folks in like the maritime inspection and compliance spaces to again help us understand how we could pivot that technology once we had addressed a DoD or national security mission space, and then pivot that technology into more of a commercial application.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that, James. With that, want to turn it to Jesse. From your side, Candelytics is the ideal example of what NSIN set out to do with really getting those startups in and then introducing them to the national security ecosystem. So from your perspective, can you tell us about how you've been able to gradually develop this ecosystem between government end users and industry, not just established companies, but even nascent stage companies? And then what is some of the key challenges in bridging that gap?
Yeah, sure. Well, there's quite a few challenges, so we'll keep it short. But I think the key is I think there's a desire on both parties, right? The government wants to work with innovative startups and great talent in academic settings, and there's a lot of, I think, really creative problem solvers out there in academic settings and in early stage startups who want to work on the types of problems that the national security world faces on a day-to-day basis. It's the challenge has been bringing those two communities together in sort of low barrier of entry ways, right? So typically, working with the government means that you have to know how to navigate government accounting processes, government acquisition systems, government security clearances. All of those things are barriers of entry that become limiting factors in terms of the number of people that we can engage. And so a core part of how NSIN operates is that we focus on tackling unclassified problems. And that eliminates some of the challenge of trying to bring in new stakeholders into the national security ecosystem. And so when we're working on a program, we're always thinking about, is there an unclassified variation of this problem, or is there just an entirely unclassified problem that is meaningful to the stakeholders that are involved from the DoD standpoint, but also then creates an entry point that's much more accessible for those who may not already be deeply working with the federal government. And there are many problems that are great problems that are very impactful to the national security mission that are frankly never going to be classified. And there's many ways for us to start engaging. And so that's a big part of how we do that is by really working with individuals to find those unclassified problems. And the example of Candelytics, which they've done a phenomenal job graduating through our DIA program, that program actually focuses on taking IP that's generated at federal labs and then handing it over to entrepreneurs who can then understand the use case for that technology, both with the federal government, but also potentially applications for that federally developed IP in non-DoD and commercial markets. And so we're looking for opportunities to try to generate traction that create true dual use technology, and whether that's taking federal IP and helping to spin out businesses that have the opportunity to do dual use, both to, defense and government work and commercial work. But also we're always open to looking at commercial businesses and seeing how their technologies could apply to a defense problem. So, and then going back and tying in sort of the blue economy piece, there's a lot in sort of the acronym that we talk about, which is HHDR, which, Health and Human Humanitarian and Disaster Relief, And like that whole category is a huge deal right now, especially in the Pacific theater, where the Indo-Pacific Command and our operating forces have an organization called Task Force Oceana that's focused on partner relationships with many of the allied countries across the Asia Pacific, and thinking through problems that they face on a day-to-day basis, which can be effects of sea level rise on mangrove production for that island. It can be loss of real estate to sea level rise, all kinds of environmental impact issues that have real humanitarian costs and destabilizing impacts around the world are issues that our Navy and our military leaders are engaged with, as well as with partners from the Department of State, Department of Commerce, and other organizations in the federal government. And so those problem areas are really joint problems. And so we're always looking for ways to pull in new technologies and problem solvers into these areas. So I think the blue economy is really rich in terms of problem sets that are cross-cutting and dual use in their nature, because there's potentially a military application, but there's also very likely, for that same military application, a non-military application that's, equally impactful, and therefore it's sort of a sweet spot for NSIN to play a role.
Awesome. And, you mentioned the importance of the Pacific coast in addressing several of these cross-functional challenges, where it's not just addressing problems for national security, but also environmental challenges. And with that, I want to turn it over to Scott Tait. I learned that ST Catalyst has its roots in place since 1976 at the forefront of innovation and addressing climate change problems as well. And what I wanted to ask you was, what can you tell us about your engagement model at ST Catalyst and what you're seeing in the blue tech economy on the West Coast?
Sure, thank you. So we don't actually go back that far. There's a number of different Catalyst organizations. Ours is rather newer, but they have done great work, and always happy to be associated with them or mistaken for them. So it's a great compliment. We take a slightly different approach. We try to look at missions rather than problems. So get the operators together with the technologists and really figure out what it is they're trying to do, because quite often what they thought was a problem disappears and there's an entirely different way to get after it. We also focus on keeping an organization that's agile and nimble enough that it can be very responsive in times of crisis. So fortunately, most of what we do is helping to kind of circumvent the bureaucracy that exists to deal with peacetime acquisition. But as we saw during COVID, it's also important to have a framework that you can leverage very rapidly when a crisis pops up. Not only is the need greater, but the barrier to entry and the resistance to innovation drops quite a bit. So those are kind of our two big modus operandi. We have this discovery process where we work with the technologists and users, and kind of a development process where we figure out what's the right way to keep the company alive and to get the product into the national security pipeline as a requirement. If you're at all familiar with how the government purchases things, there's requirements where operators say they have a need, and then there's acquisition where once that need is approved and funded, somebody is chartered to go and get it. And unfortunately, once you get to the acquisition side, there often isn't a lot of room left for innovation because they've been told what to buy and they only have a certain amount of money to buy it. So we try to focus more on the requirement and then find a way to keep the company engaged through contract, some sort of contracting or something else, while their solution gets developed through the government system as a more sustainable product. So with regard to what we're seeing in blue tech on the West Coast, I would just call it an explosion. On the research side, we've got world-leading organizations like Scripps here in San Diego, the big NOAA presence that's all up and down the coast, but particularly here, the more than 50 different marine research organizations that are along the Pacific coast. All of these are providing an incredible kind of science-based foundation for innovation. Then we've got this incredible universe of blue tech clusters, including things like TMA Blue Tech here in San Diego. The Port of San Diego has an aquaculture and blue tech incubator that has been pretty successful in doing creative things and nurturing young entrepreneurs. I think when you look down the road 7 years, there's going to be a very robust blue tech innovation and workforce development facility that's planned as part of the waterfront redevelopment that's going to take place here. And then finally, we've got a lot of West Coast investors that are really enthusiastic about the opportunities in blue tech, both from a do good side and a do well. And I think we're seeing them take really substantial bets on everything from things like cell-cultured seafood to deep open exploration.
So thanks so much, Scott. So just to follow up on that ecosystem piece, I wanted to turn it over to you, Christian. MassChallenge has this model of experts, startups, and partners. And I want to ask you, how does this engagement model work well to maintain visibility across the blue economy and as well as actualizing engagement across these different groups?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And if you don't mind, actually, I'd love to ask Scott a question, and I want to congratulate James and the Candelytics team because it's not officially announced yet, and don't want to burst a bubble on it, but Candelytics got into the most recent MassChallenge early stage program here in the US. So really excited about that and excited to be working with you, James, as we get down the road. And Jesse, thank you very much. NSIN is a longtime sponsor of our programs as we've stood them up to support dual use founders really getting into this. I would say between our partners, our startups, and then our ecosystem, as I mentioned before, MassChallenge is simply a convening platform. We like to go into cities, different ecosystems that we see a lot of gaps in between organizations. So if you take MassChallenge Boston, for example, Northeast here has been there's a history of research, there's a history of public-private partnerships, but we've always lost a lot of our top startups, Facebook being one of them that we look back on. And why can't we keep our teams here? We lose them to the West Coast. No offense, Scott. You guys have beautiful facilities out there and a great ecosystem that's very thriving. But we'd like to think that we have that technical capabilities. We have those academic institutions. We have the VCs here, and we have large corporates that can provide those resources that are necessary for early stage company to get their feet underneath them. We have all this engagement happen during our accelerator programs, but is really the roadmap that we see our early stage startups taking through this journey. So we will push our dual use teams, since we're focusing on that side of the topic, really towards the government funding because it is not dilutive. We are not taking any equity from our startups because we know that at the earliest stages, this really hinders their growth and the speed at which they can make that impact. So we really want them to go after aligned models, such as a dual use model, understanding that it can really help them get them on their feet and then help them scale later on by validating with a government customer, but then also getting the funds to be able to develop the aligned product that they can go onto the commercial side with as well. So that's been really successful for us. We run an early stage program, this competition-based model where we will have our ecosystem actually judge and select the teams and bring in the top startups that apply to the program. So each year we have typically around 5,000 applications from around the globe. About 3,500 of them are here in the United States, and then we'll bring our cohorts down to about 250 in the US total. That's in between our individual programs at about 100 each. Looking at that specifically, though, once they get into the programs is where the engagement really happens. We have our partners, we have our VCs really help select the companies. And then once they're in is when we bring in our partners and the resources they have to provide. So whether that be experts within specific program offices, that might be the Air Force as we're working with them and being able to bring in their contracting officers to advise on specific opportunities that are presenting themselves, or it might be that end user that they are actually developing that product for or that service so they can actually get that feedback and continue to iterate on that product. So that is happening during the actual accelerator program. And we'd like to think of it as a very curated experience where it's removing the typical barriers of entry to time and money, where our founders would have to go out and run down these introductions themselves, try to work their way into organizations like BAE or Raytheon when we have direct partnerships there and ready access for them just through a request for introduction. So during this time period, we really want to focus on the early stage teams getting from 0 to 1 or 0 to phase 1 to get that foot in the door, start doing the exploratory phase. And then we can start supporting them through our vertical programs, such as the Air Force Labs program, our health tech program, our fintech program, where we'll focus on specific challenges. And this is what really aligned well with the government cyber programs and the problem sets that they're putting out there. So being able to align challenges with specific subsets of startups that are in that realm was really helpful. And then having the Air Force and our government partners on the other side be able to take those in and provide feedback and provide end users, MOUs, and customers is really helpful as well. What we've seen is you have to follow that roadmap from beginning to end. A lot of deep tech companies, especially in the blue economy that we're working with, have a 10 to 15 year trajectory versus the 3 to 5 year trajectory that we're seeing from software companies. So being able to maintain that and maintain that support throughout can be tough, especially with the turnover that we see within government, especially when our founders have found a champion within a specific program office and they're working on a deep tech product that could take 10 years out and they're turning over that champion every 2 to 3 years. So making sure that budgets are aligned, priorities are aligned, and that you have a program that's willing to support you throughout, and then be able to make sure that those touch points are staying consistent during that time. So I'll stop there before I keep rambling.
Yeah, no, that's a great opening into MassChallenge. You did mention you had a question for Scott, so I want to give you the time to go ahead with that. So,
Scott, you mentioned the kind of shift between acquisitions and actual functional teams, and that's one of the biggest problems that we've faced with, say, the AFWERX open topic or some of the new considerations within the acquisitions right now, where we are bringing in a ton of teams and there is a lot of need for them, but getting them to actual right end users and then prioritizing them with those functional users that actually have budget beyond phase 2 is something that's been really tough for us. We believe it's a bit of a cultural gap that's happening where acquisitions is really moving fast, but then the demand signal isn't quite right coming from those actual functional users. So finding a right home for our product has been tough. Do you see that gap closing at all, or at least the functional users understanding where acquisitions is moving towards?
I doubt you'll see a change there because the incentives are different. I mean, one of the reasons that they go to the primes are because the primes are safe, right? They're going to be able to deliver some of these programs that they're developing, as you said, are 10, 15 years in the making, and then have a service life of 20 or 30 years. So on the acquisition side, to bet on a startup is very, very risky. To bet on a prime is very safe. So on the acquisition side, we actually try to pair the companies up with the right primes or with larger companies that can help take their service and meet the requirement. But it seems to be key to get it into the requirement side correctly. Right now, unfortunately, the operators are asking for the proverbial faster horse. They only know what they have. And if we can expose them to what's actually out there to meet their needs so that they're crafting requirements such that they're describing the best that's available, then there are a lot of creative ways to keep the company alive long enough and continue to iterate. If the company's doing something that allows them to provide their demonstration as a service. So if they're providing operational value from day one, oftentimes the operational commands can contract them almost as a service ongoing for years on end. And the company provides all the sustainment stuff that would eventually be baked into a program of record. So training, maintenance, all of that those sort of things that are essential for long-term health, but are very hard to get in the beginning. So we try to never have them just do a drive-by fielding and drop off a toy, but get an engagement where they can get enough revenue to survive as the requirement gets developed, and then be ready to find the right entry point to meet that requirement on the acquisition side. But I'd love to talk to you more about it offline so we don't bore people to death with acquisition tactics here.
System integrators are a very key component of this ecosystem, and it's sometimes it's a necessary evil to go slow, but sometimes if you want to go big, you need to go through the right channels.
Yeah, go big or go long. But everything you said is spot on.
Well, I just want to take the time to introduce another one of our panelists. Sorry for the tech trouble, Kelly, but why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to the rest of the group?
Thank you, Devansh. Sorry that I missed everyone else's introductions, but I'm very honored to sit amongst such an esteemed panel and lucky to be here. So I'm also sitting in California like many of the other panelists today, but I actually represent a foreign government. So I'm coming from Innovation Norway, and we are the Norwegian government's most important tool for trade and innovation. So I know we have some ecosystem players here too. Innovation Norway is providing grants, loans, and guarantees for Norwegian enterprises. We also fund things like innovation contracts with foreign companies. And I wear two hats. One, helping Norwegian companies come to this market, obviously with a strong history in maritime excellence and innovation and digitalization. But then also for the audience members, I'm interested to meet you because we support foreign companies to enter into the Norwegian ecosystem where we see gaps and holes. So I don't want to take up too much time on intro, but that's a little bit about me. Thanks, Devansh.
Awesome, Kelly. And why don't we get kicked off with a question for you then? Given that you represent Norway in the US, from that government perspective, how do you maintain engagement with the startup community in the US based on Norwegian government needs?
So what I see happening in Norway is high-level policy being set. You can take a look in June 2019, the ocean strategy for Norway was updated. And we focused on energy, oil and gas, also aquaculture and fisheries, and maritime, which is shipping and something like electric ferries, for example. So Innovation Norway's function is to generate business development where the policy is coming down. And so electric ferries is a great example of success in that. There was a lot of infrastructure packages that went out. Innovation Norway supports to disseminate that information and those funds. And then now you could go to almost any city in Norway and ride a clean mobility. So that's a little bit of my focus. And I would say too, there's sister organizations to Innovation Norway that fund these kinds of ideas and research and development. And how we bring it closer together is also with services like myself, for example, where we can give advice about how to grow and how to best place yourself in new markets.
Awesome.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kelly. And with that, what's got me thinking is that several of the problems within the blue economy aren't, localized to the US. It's really global problems that we're trying to address. I know, Scott, you mentioned that you have engagement with Five Eyes. I know MassChallenge, you also have the Bridge to MassChallenge program where you have engagement with Morocco, Taiwan, Nigeria. So really open question to the group, and whoever wants to go first can take it. But what are you seeing with regards to international collaboration in addressing challenges in the blue economy? Whoever wants to go first. Christian, why don't you go first at the top of my screen?
I was going to ask Scott to go ahead and take that one, but
Sure.
Our bridge programs are essentially mini mass challenges. We'll go into ecosystems around the world or different cities for a couple different purposes. We want to surface the top talent there, make sure that we're seeing what's really happening in those different regions. It is very specific, even here in the US, where our programs in the Northeast are focused on very deep tech things, whereas down in Texas, we might be looking at energy. This correlates as we look globally, and we want to make sure each of those ecosystems that we're moving in has the components that we're looking for. We need the local government or the federal government to be on board with us. We need the corporations to be able there to be signed on, academic institutions to be able to be feeding talent into the organizations, and the VCs and dollars to be backing it up. So as we look at these bridge programs, we're also assessing each of these ecosystems for their kind of innovation capabilities, and then trying to bring the top of the talent to the top, and then try to bring it back to the United States. I would say in terms of blue economy, there's a lot of different challenges that they're facing that are very similar to us. You notice as we start talking about blue economy and new technologies in space, we kind of evolve back into acquisitions again and back into the same challenges that we face in any other part of kind of the deep tech dual use ventures ecosystem here. So when I talk about blue economy, when I look at Norway, my question when I knew Kelly was going to be jumping on is, how are you bringing government and industry together? Here in the United States, we've had a bit of a separation between government and industry. We see industry outpacing government, and government trying to take a similar model to the venture model and be able to invest in some of these top technologies that are coming about. But there is that kind of bureaucracy in between where we have those kind of valley of death moments where our companies can't make that jump to the next layer of funding and actually integration technology transfer. How are you guys better promoting that as you guys are building out your economy? Because whenever we see it, Northeast is losing to San Diego here, and I'm competing with the guys on the other coast, whereas we should be kind of working together. And you guys have a program bringing technology in from out of Norway, whereas I can't work with a team that actually gets that's not US based or 51% US owned into our cyber programs. So I don't know if that's a good answer. We've been looking for new platforms around the world. I would definitely say Southeast Asia has been a big place for us to look for blue economy technologies popping up. Definitely up in Norway and up in, I would say definitely San Diego too, as we kind of start pushing their direction. A lot of great test grounds your way, and you guys have a lot deeper water than we do.
We see the same in San Diego, and I enjoy going down there and talking to the Port of San Diego and some of the projects they have going on. I'd love to jump in and answer your question if that's okay, Devansh.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah, thanks for that, Christian. And one big piece that I didn't say in my intro is actually that Innovation Norway funds business clusters. So we have the Ocean Autonomy Cluster, we have the Maritime Clean Tech Cluster, we have the Ocean Technology Cluster. There's several maritime-focused business clusters that Innovation Norway initially puts funding into to help seed that and help them grow. And there's a plan to phase out Innovation Norway funding as far as allowing those business enterprises to develop by themselves with a little bit of a kickstart from government money. And then how we support them also is by supporting with introductions from this ecosystem into their place. Aquai, many of you may have heard of this autonomous underwater drone. They are a success story from my point of view, where they've actually opened a Norwegian subsidiary in the northern part of Norway, in Bodø, in order to have access to their aquaculture clients.
Kelly, does Norway have organizations such as NSIN? NSIN's a sponsor of MassChallenge, and they've been a critical partner for us to actually build out our kind of venture into government and federal funding. I'm just wondering if Norway has similar organizations, or Jesse, if you guys have bumped into anyone like them.
I missed Jesse's intro, so I'd love to hear more about how you work with him, and then I could respond. What say you, Jesse?
Sure. Well, I was going to maybe take the question a little bit different direction, but so without having to rehash it, Kelly, NSIN's a DoD organization, and one of the things we do is we fund commercial accelerators to support DoD interests. And so I was going to kind of go down that path anyway, but so NSIN, we very much so believe that like the government has the ability to take technology risk with our investment that might be better than what we see in the investment from like the VC world, but the VC world understands commercial risk in a way that the government doesn't. And so we think there's a lot of value in trying to partner the government's willingness to take long-term technology risk, which is something that we're very used to investing around through the research enterprises of the government, but also pairing that up with the market forecasting ability and the speed at which commercial enterprise moves when backed by traditional venture capital across the United States and around the world. And so that's part of why we've helped fund MassChallenge to focus on this dual use track, is they have obviously got a proven track record of finding companies through their own processes and then pulling them through a well-vetted process and then spitting those companies out into the world in a way that allows them to grow more rapidly. And as the Department of Defense, if that company is growing fast because they're making investments in the commercial industries that are moving faster than the government can pace, while we would love the government to pace at the same speed as those commercial markets, in reality, based on things that Scott and others talked about before, the DoD is not going to be the fastest moving market anytime soon. And so in the meantime, if we can help fund the development of important technologies in key areas where we know that there's going to be interest for government use cases and for commercial use cases for a long time, help seed the development of that technology and then become beneficiaries of that technology as it matures, both with commercial investment and with government investment over time, that we can be very successful. And so there are lots of categories within the blue economy, whether it's aquaculture or maritime robotics or a variety of different technologies that really matter to a lot of users, both commercial and government. And so trying to think through how do we partner with those out in industry who have proven to be able to develop, identify and create successful businesses. And then, we can have those fights internal to the government, thinking about how we can get faster, smarter, better at acquiring that technology and being a good partner to those companies. But at least from a technology development standpoint, I think the government has, maybe more experience investing in technology that's unproven. And so we can at least benefit industries by taking that experience that is quite robust and modifying it to the modern era, while still trying to transform the traditional acquisition process so that we can be a better customer faster. But in the meantime, a lot of what we're trying to do is just be more agile in how we invest in early stage technology. And the blue economy is certainly an area where there are a lot of emerging fields that we care about. So I guess this would be, I sort of answered your question, but didn't end with the question that I was going to ask. And this can go out to the panel and also maybe something for the attendees to think about. But, when we funded MassChallenge and when we partner with commercial accelerators, we're aligning a DoD end user who cares about a particular technology vertical, and then really relying on that commercial accelerator to recruit companies to pull them into that process that we can then look at for future investment, as well as them looking for investment elsewhere. I think one of the things I'd be curious to hear kind of collected from the group are what are those technology verticals that you all see the most interest in, right? Because I think we're always trying to think about, where are those overlaps and those synergies between what we're hearing from government customers who want specific types of technology, and where is there overlap then with, where the commercial markets are moving? Because those seem to be areas where, at least from an NSIN perspective, we would like to be investing in.
I'll just throw that out there. Quick answer is we're seeing them in all the same areas that we're seeing kind of deep tech technology on land. So whether it be advanced materials or communications right now, battery power, all the same stuff that we're looking at for the same problem sets for Air Force are coming across with Navy. I would say the one thing that we haven't seen as much as we did back in 2013 to 2015 is definitely in the clean tech space. There was much more of a focus in clean tech space back in that time frame, and it's kind of waned a little bit for us. But yeah, that's where we're seeing it.
Data analytics, AI, and autonomy also pretty much universal demand.
Yeah, digitalizing anything. I don't know if you guys have heard of IO Currents in California here, or sorry, actually they're in the state above us, but they just had a new deal with Kongsberg Digital, and they're going to be doing like tracking of wear and tear on parts on boats over time. But I have to say, from the Norwegian government, there's an extreme focus on clean tech. That's why this is my dream job, because everything I do touches the Paris Climate Agreement. So the technologies that we're looking for, and just to be clear, I'm really more about industry than I am about government. I don't do purchasing for the Norwegian government. I support companies that want to grow, and so I see what's coming. And what I see in Norway is a lot of electrification and hydrogen. I would say hydrogen is the thing that's been talked about for the last 5 to 10 years. It's probably the newest technology that's now, how do we scale that? And another example of scaling new technologies recently is the Hywind Tampen project off the coast of Scotland with floating offshore wind. And for all of us here in California, we know that there's zero offshore wind off the coast of California. And that's because we have a deep water problem. So bringing those kinds of technologies to the forefront in new markets like here in California, and bringing those companies over here to help solve those problems is relevant from my side.
We have a brand new wind farm coming on south of Martha's Vineyard soon here. Shallow seas, though. So most of our work is done out in Newport, and there's just not the testing facilities that you guys have over there. So different applications that we're looking at versus the testing grounds that you guys might have around the Pacific. James, I have a quick question for a startup perspective. Why Coast Guard? Why Blue Tech? It seems like your guys' capabilities can range beyond that. Seems like a tough place to start first.
Yeah, it's a great question, and part of the answer to that again is maybe the question is two-part. Like maybe it's like why defense first, given that many teams who came out of NSIN went commercial, like with some of that technology. So first, like maybe why defense, and then why Coast Guard. From a defense standpoint, the team was very much aligned with the space in terms of we all come from. I come from a software development background, developing wireless tech for the intelligence community through a derivative of Bell Labs. Both of my co-founders again are ex-Army, actually currently Army Reserves, and so again we like understood the space and felt comfortable. Therefore, moving through navigating kind of like those contracting waters. With respect to and I'll also add, and it was also very much aligned with our partners who were Navy, the Navy's preeminent LiDAR scanning lab. So even though they were doing it for an engineering application, right, what we found is that, hey, we can apply this to a tactical mission, and therefore the Coast Guard was a great option in terms of leveraging their expertise into an adjacent kind of market. However, really the reason though why Coast Guard is the data play. So as the previous question was like, why, or what are you seeing interest in terms of commercial space? Obviously, as Scott said too, data analytics, AI, machine learning, data management in general, given the coming wave of 3D data, being able to manage that volume of data is something that is very interesting across domains. But one of the reasons why we chose Coast Guard is because they represent an army, essentially, of data collectors, which will allow us to quickly amass the largest 3D maritime data set in the world. Given that the Coast Guard conducts nearly 5,000 boardings, and given that they have a doctrinal requirement to document these boardings, being able to deploy this technology on board as part of that mission, and therefore collect 3D LiDAR scans of these vessels for the purposes of, and then layering on additional analytics in terms of automatic detection and classification of features, it just provides a wealth of data for us to train models that even if we don't necessarily own that Coast Guard data or that law enforcement data, we can export those models into the commercial maritime space to do things such as compliance detection, digital twinning of samples, and as you mentioned, Kelly, kind of like samples or measurements across those vessels, spatially tagged and categorized, and applying some of those models and analytics to those data sets is something that we found a lot of alignment on in terms of the exportability of that technology.
I'm excited to work with you guys this year. It's gonna be fun.
We're very excited. Thanks, Christian.
Awesome. We have a question from the audience. It came in specifically for Kelly, but I think I'll open it up to the entire group as well. New tech needs new ideas, needs new people. What can we do to promote and encourage new people into this emerging tech sector? So Scott, maybe we'll start with you.
So to attract new people in, that's really Jesse's stock in trade. I mean, they're doing some incredible things to get young people exposed to these types of challenges, and the government as it really is, not as it's sometimes portrayed in movies. But I think the young kids, the young people are going to follow the most interesting tech that they think is going to have the biggest impact, and a lot of that is going to be blue tech. And if we who work with government can make a place for that where they can get funded and do meaningful work, then they'll come.
Awesome. Any other comments there, Jesse? You want to take that one?
I can chime in, but since the question was directed to Kelly, I don't know, Kelly, if you want to take a stab at it. But so we have a program called Hacking for Defense that, we take problems from the services and provide them to students across 40 different universities in the United States. And they're also looking at expanding that internationally through our partnership with a company called BMNT, which I know is very involved in this event. But there was an example this year where we're working on a problem about mammal detection, which is a big deal for the U.S. Navy. Obviously, the Navy is concerned about mammal strikes in the places where it trains, also concerned about impacts from sonars and different technologies the Navy uses to track and identify them. And so there's a lot of concern for how the Navy operates and what that has an impact on mammal strikes. But that's also a big issue for the commercial shipping business that is actually far bigger player in that space than the U.S. Navy is. And so I think that's a great example of where there's a convergence of, we ran a program that involved some really sharp minds at UCSD. Some of them were in the Scripps Institute of Oceanography, but they weren't tracking this problem. At least those individual students were, and we gave them a way to try to make an impact on something that's an important problem to a lot of different stakeholders across California and really across the world. And so, to Scott's point, I think the talent attraction piece is about giving people an opportunity to work on meaningful problems and apply their skill sets. And so, I think the government can be a great place for problems, and when we can be agile enough to give people those opportunities to move at the speed at which they want, then I think we'll be a great partner in that process. And the government continues to invest heavily in our universities and our research enterprises. And so, from that standpoint, I think we continue to cultivate great research talent. We don't always do the best job making sure that great research talent works on our problems, but that's something that we're trying to address through some of the programs that NSIN runs and others. But Kelly, I'd love to hear from, I'm sure Norway has a ton of workforce initiatives, and I'd love to hear what you guys are doing.
Thank you for that. Yeah, we do have some pretty strong universities when it comes to blue tech. Often it's referred to as ocean industry, or rather than blue tech. That's I had to define that term to my colleagues when I pinged them for some fun facts to share with you all. And I would say the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, NTNU, is usually where we find research projects, professors to talk to different US enterprises who are trying to do something interesting in the blue tech space. We usually send them up north, but also the University of Oslo and University of Bergen have really interesting maritime programs. You may not be able to find Norway on a map, but it does have the longest coastline. And so there is, of course, expertise in-house. Here in Silicon Valley, we run a program called the School of Entrepreneurship in collaboration with UC Berkeley. And so that has been successful over the last at least 9 years of training up entrepreneurs in the Silicon Valley area and then sending them back to the Nordics to share their ideas and to share their new, technologies. We've actually seen several entrepreneurs come back to Silicon Valley and start several companies that have been successful here based on that, heavily based on tech. And so I think that's what I would share as far as how do we do talent generation. On a personal note, I'm a female engineer. I have a master's in ocean engineering and 5 years experience working in the field in the Gulf of Mexico, living on a boat for a month at a time. So I'm sure some of you have had that experience too. And I can say, how do you attract more women? How do you attract more people into the engineering space would be to really think about mentorship, because we can't do that without our ambassadors. There has to be mentorship and there has to be a certain amount of sponsorship in order to get more diverse teams to be more successful, because that's a proven fact that more diverse teams are more successful. Thank you.
Awesome. Go ahead, Christian. I see your hand raised.
I put it simply, for us, it's exposure. We have a lot of great talent coming through. A lot of our students that are coming out of universities have great ideas, have great technologies, but they're not sure where to apply them. And being able to expose them to the challenges that are out there to be solved, especially in the blue economy, whether it be in the energy, security, communications, material side of things, there's huge opportunities. And as soon as a lot of our founders are introduced to those opportunities, they're like, wow, I had no idea that this was a whole avenue I could take to grow a company and really get us up on our feet. And we always use the reference of doing really well in your kitty corner expertise, really making sure that they're honing in Candelytics, James, similar to what you guys are doing with maybe the Coast Guard and expanding from there. That's just something that a lot of our founders had no idea that the opportunity existed. So just the introduction, the exposure, and the more we talk about it, the more we kind of get this message out there. And Jesse, I know we have never spoken before in person, but we're preaching the same thing on both coasts here. And it's great to see that you guys have that same message and getting out there. So keep going back to your universities, keep attracting more talent back, and let them know that this stuff exists and there's ways to go about it, that they are not on their own and there is an infrastructure around to help them out.
You raised an interesting point, Christian, that makes me, want to put a question to James. Actually, is, what we've seen through this conversation is that there's actually an incredibly rich and strong ecosystem to facilitate and almost attract more entrepreneurs to take that step and go ahead and address certain challenges. So I want to ask you, and then open it to the rest of the group as well, what do you observe as some of the key issues holding entrepreneurs back from taking that step, given that there is a robust ecosystem of support to address these challenges?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Do you just to clarify, are you kind of like referring to entrepreneurship in general, or like particularly in the space? In
this space specifically as well, even from your experience, from what you've seen, what do you see as holding folks back from taking that step?
Yeah, I mean, I think as kind of has already been mentioned, I mean, there's always going to be, especially for folks in technology, there's going to be a lot of competing opportunities, right? And oftentimes problems that seem more proximate, I believe, to them. Again, that's why I think that a lot of the problems that face kind of more social media or some of the stuff that's again more tied into kind of like pop culture tends to pull, I think, a lot of young people into those spaces. However, I'll just say from our perspective, we have even being a defense first, if you would, startup, which is typically a very unpopular thing to do among traditional VCs, have been very well received in those circles. I think primarily because, going back again to like exposure to good problems, people resonate with good problems. So whether that's so in our case, being able to tell the narrative, getting close enough to the problem where you understand that you have Coast Guard men and women on their hands and knees in the bilges, right? Like in a cold, dark ship, right? In dangerous conditions with measuring tape, pen and paper, right? Like that paints a very vivid picture. And when you layer that on top of the mission that they're trying to solve, which is, stopping the flow of human trafficking, weapons, and narcotics, those are problems that make a difference in the world. And so I think that people can really resonate with those type of problems and get behind them. And so perhaps part of it is just, again, reframing these type of problems, or at least bringing them to the light in terms of the scope and size of the challenges that face that face kind of the blue tech ecosystem, and bringing those to front and center. Obviously, when it comes to clean technology, when it comes to the environment, preserving the ecosystem, national security, blue tech touches all of those spaces. It's just that perhaps those are not as obvious to young people. And I particularly can relate and resonate with the fact that, with my work in Candelytics and then previously in the defense space, you really come to identify and gain a lot of personal satisfaction from supporting missions that protect our national security, our freedoms, our men and women in uniform. And that is a very addicting culture to be a part of. And so I guess I wish that was signaled better to young people, especially in universities. And I feel fortunate, right, that I was able to kind of get a taste of that through an internship. And that led me then to go full time into the defense, the defense space, and then eventually start our own thing with Candelytics. But I do think that the young people resonate with good problems, and that again, if we can paint those problems in terms and in the context of the scope of why those things make a difference, that would help people make that jump.
Absolutely. It was the recent vector challenge that we ran. We helped NSIN with Jesse, and we engaged with some of the students coming out of Hacking for Defense, and it's exactly as you said. It was a reframing of how those government problems actually manifest themselves in terms of the human aspect, the operators behind those challenges. And we saw a cohort of close to 40-odd students just charged up to solve these problems for men and women in uniform. So that was an incredibly exciting experience as well. I just want to be cognizant of time and maybe go quick once around the room to just a fun question right at the end of, one thing you're excited about for the blue economy. And we'll start with Kelly this time, going down the order of my screen.
Thanks. I got top of mind. The Yara Birkeland project, autonomous shipping vessel, runs on 100% renewable energy, already moving manure up and down the coast of Norway. So that kind of huge shift in shipping fuel to hydrogen and battery is going to be rad.
Awesome. How about you, Scott?
I think it's the companies that are talking about the return of sail as our primary means of moving cargo. So they see a future where as clean energy reduces demand for oil and additive manufacturing reduces the need to move completed goods, the shipping industry goes largely back to bulk. And if you go to bulk, you don't have a race to market. So you go back to sail because automated sailing ships will be cheaper than powered ships. And all the changes that go with that in terms of different ports, different sea routes, everything kind of changes when that happens. I think that's going to be very exciting. And there's a lot of money going into it right now.
Awesome. Over to you, James. What are you most excited about for the blue economy moving forward?
I think again, given the space that we're in, excited to see the perhaps this is not so macro, but again, the adoption of some of this digital, 3D technology that allows us to adapt to things like as we've seen through COVID, right? More of remote operations. So, for instance, like the remote inspections of ships via LiDAR scanning or 3D capture is something that I think is really exciting. And again, helping to digitize what has digitized some of the traditional maritime engineering practices to move towards 21st century digital twinning and kind of like 3D modeling is something that I think is that really is going to open the door for a lot more again data analytics. And again, solving like efficiency issues that I think have previously gone untouched to this point.
Great, thanks, James. Jesse, over to you.
Yeah, so I think I'll maybe build on James. I think for me, it's a combination of just an increase in autonomous vehicles, especially like long endurance ships that can be out either subsurface or surface for extended periods of time, and then what that means for the data and both the volume of data that we'll have and the quality of data, either in seafloor mapping to everything else in between, and then what can happen from an AI modeling standpoint with that data. So I think we're just now getting to the point where there's in some of the problems that we deal with, where there's a ton of disparate data sources that are being generated, and we're working through how do you scrub and release those things and then start building AI models on top of that that can actually provide meaningful insights. So we're just now getting to that point. And I see that that's going to be an unbelievable opportunity for the blue economy moving forward.
Great. Christian, over to you.
I got three super high level ones. Probably looking at interoperability in between systems, trying to plug in, trying to transfer data, trying to share that information and be able to connect site to site. What takes to make that happen is public-private partnerships. Once again, industry working with government promoting industry to be able to do this, solve the hard problems. I would say probably the biggest one is speed to technology transition. hopefully it keeps getting faster and we keep getting better at it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I think this was an incredibly insightful conversation. Some great specific examples as well as high-level insights from you folks. So appreciate everyone's time. And to the audience, thanks so much for joining us today. And we look forward to having you with us tomorrow.